Hi folks, you're with us today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the idea of political representation in the West. Now, given the mass immigration that the West has had over the last 25 years or so, what we're finding all across the West, and certainly in Australia, is that whether it be at the local level of local councils or of state or regional governments or federal governments, that there's an increasing number of non-native born citizens or recently created citizens that are being put in parliament. Now a lot of this is not necessarily these people are per se politically active, but rather they've concentrated in ghetto areas. So an entire population, 90% plus of the population in a certain electoral district may be of one race or another. They may be all Indian or all Chinese or all, Arabic or something, that sort of thing. So this would skew the sort of people that may be selected to represent them in Parliament, and the completely white controlled and globalist controlled political party machinery thinks, well, the best way to win a district, to sit in Parliament in that area is to make sure we have an Indian candidate, because they'll be able to better communicate to their local Indian diaspora. Now, this, of course, is part of the fracturing of society and creating social division where none, should really exist. But this is how it is now. As a result, these local sort of Balkan nations within nations are expecting to have their own people in the parliaments or the councils or whatever, and these people represent them. They don't represent the nation or the community or the society. They uniquely represent that diaspora, and their job in the parliament or the council is to get special benefits, additional benefits, and additional handouts for their own diaspora. And if that means the money has to be taken from other areas or to uniquely favour the diaspora, then so be it. And remember, again, most of these, if not all of these people, have the view that wealth is a fixed sum. You don't create new wealth; you have a fixed amount of wealth, and so it shows how powerful and influential you are if you can take wealth from other people. And it's too bad for them, but good for you. And so these are hardly citizens that are integrating or want the benefit. Everyone to benefit, far from it. They want their own diaspora to unusually and exceptionally benefit, and they seek political influence and are given it by the party machines. The white controlled party machines are given that undue influence. So they come to, again, the parliaments or whatever, the Congress, only representing their diaspora in effect, and arguing for special benefits, special exceptions, special dispensations, special handouts for their diaspora, and that's their only purpose in Parliament. They seem to have nothing to contribute when it's, say, legislation being debated that is meant to be for the benefit of everybody, or has any sort of relevance outside of their immediate district and needs. So now, the one thing that all these people want is that they're all in favour of mass migration, and they're all in favour of easy citizenship, refugees, family reunion, mail order brides from the village of their ancestors. They're in favour of all these sorts of things that are very antithetical to the Western lifestyle and culture and so on. So they're effectively a whole group of people that are really busily selling out the West, the Western citizens, the Western society, aggressively doing it, all for the unique and focused benefit of their own diaspora. Now, so the question is, and I'm thinking about this and putting it out there, is that why would we want people in Parliament or any form of political representation who have an attitude where they only represent their own diaspora and are there for the benefit of no one or anything else, and they're actively wanting to steal taxpayer money to give it to their own diaspora under one corrupt bullshit process or another? So, they all come from very corrupt societies, these people, and they make no mistake, they bring their corruption with them, and so they're turning regional parliaments and local councils into corrupt hellscapes, because that's what they're used to. Now, but would it make a difference if we made restrictions? Let's say that only people could stand for office if they had lineage in the country. So if you don't have grandparents born in the country, then you can't stand for office and a political office. That's would that make any difference? Now let's have a look at the politicians that have sold out Britain, for example. Britain has mass migration. Their local population has been sold out massively. Their culture is being eradicated. If you even talk about the British state and or England and speak well of England's history, then you're written off as a damn Nazi and all this. I mean, it's turning into a universal hellscape over there. But let's have a look at the politicians doing that. For we'd say Tony Blair, his grandparents were British. If you look at Gordon Brown, his grandparents were British. Boris Johnson, not so much. But if you look at David Cameron, I'm talking about British prime ministers here. Theresa May. You look at all these people that aggressively adopted the globalist process and the globalist project aggressively, mass migration, the whole nine, lying to the British people. We're going to reduce migration when in fact they were doubling it or tripling it. So they really aggressively adopted the globalist program and sold out their fellow citizens in a big way. Deceived them, lied to them, and just sold them out. And they all had grandparents, or even going back further than that, grandparents born in Britain. So would it make a difference? It appears not. I would say I prefer people who had a closer relationship to the society than those that didn't. But anyway, so I don't know if it would make a difference. Again, the people who've sold out Britain have been, other than Boris Johnson, have got long lineage going back in British society. Some going back to the fucking Middle Ages, for goodness sakes. Yet they still are selling out their fellow citizens. So that clearly is not the material point here. The sellout, the idea of people from the Indian subcontinent coming to the West and wanting to create India within the Western state they come to, and doggedly refusing to integrate or assimilate. I don't think that they're not a good choice of migrants. So why do it? And again, looking at every place that Indian immigrants went to in the 1850s and 1860s, their integration rate is still 5% or less. So I don't think it's going to, they're not going to integrate. We need to accept that. And it's going to increasingly balkanize all the Western countries that have accepted large numbers of Chinese or Indians. And the more you accept as a group, or Pakistanis, the more you accept as a group, the more they can hang around in ghettos and exist as nations within nations, or one racial diaspora having their own geographic area of control, in effect, their own unique representatives and so on, rather than an integrated society as a whole. Now, Australia talks about, well, it's one of the most successful integration stories in the world, and to a large extent that's true. But prior to sort of 1970, really all the migrants were accepted were white or Mediterranean sort of white. They were all Christians, all European, and so on. So only a tiny minority, 1.5%, didn't fit into that category. They were the ones that had the most problem with existing in a society. But once the mix of immigrant changed and the mix of any refugees changed, and that sort of happened from, say, the mid-1970s, slowly, the Vietnamese and so on slowly to embrace, say, Christian Lebanese from the Middle East and so on, then those societies haven't integrated at all, well, to some extent, very minimally. Those people still send back to the village of their ancestors for husbands and brides. Christians who came from Lebanon in the 1970s. One of them I know, and they got married recently, or the grandson got married recently, or was it the daughter? They both got married quite close together, and the daughter was getting married, and they sent back to Lebanon for a husband for her from the village that they came from. And the wedding ceremony was all they did was talk about the village of their ancestors and how it's a good village, and the village is well thought of in the Arabic diaspora and Lebanon, or where it was in the Middle East. It was insane. You'd think you were living in the Dark Ages, for goodness sakes. You think you were going back 1,000 years in time, the way the things they spoke about in the wedding. Everybody in the wedding ceremony only spoke Arabic, and there wasn't any English. There was an MC that would announce a couple of things. That was everything else was in Arabic. And again, these are the grandchildren. So the integration rate is very low for the people who came after 1975 in terms of the mix of immigrants, whereas the people before, the integration rate was reasonably high. It wasn't absolutely perfect, by the way, but for example, large masses of Italians came over in one group, and they all moved into the same area, and they all did business with each other and opened Italian shops and so on. So their integration rate took it still only really took one generation to integrate. The children born in Australia, they integrated. But the people who came en masse, they, after 20, 30 years, their English is still pretty how you going. And I was talking to one guy about it, and he said, look, we came over in such a large group that we didn't need to speak English. We did business with each other. We employed each other. We opened up Italian shops, and we shopped with each other. So, our children became Australianised, but we didn't need to. There was just so many of us that came over, and hardly any of us spoke any English. So anyway, this is so coming back to the issue of, would it make any difference if only people whose grandparents were born in the West, in the local country concerned, would it make a difference if they were only people could hold political office if their grandparents were born in the country? I don't think it would. I think it may play out slightly differently, and the motivations may be different, but would the outcome be different whether or not you have a recent arriving Indian sort of politician deciding things like Rishi Sunak in Britain? Would that be any different from a David Cameron or a Tony Blair? If you look at the policies Tony Blair and Rishi Sunak are pursuing, they're obviously globalist instructed, but there's barely any difference between them. And so my sort of take would be, it's not going to make any difference. So now the issue is, well, what will make the difference? People that believe are patriots, because it wasn't hard to find politicians that were patriots. Even if they weren't very bright, they were patriots. We may get brighter politicians, maybe not so much, but even the ones who might be brighter today and smarter and better educated, they're certainly not patriots. Far from it. They've really bought into the globalist shtick, and they're happily and busily and aggressively selling out their fellow citizens. So I don't know if it's even possible to find patriots amongst the elite today. It must be. I wouldn't sell out my fellow citizens, so I wouldn't necessarily classify myself as a patriot, but I wouldn't sell out my fellow citizens. I don't think that's how democracy and the structure is meant to work. So given that, I'm not sure what sort of politician would be patriotic and consider the society at large and their fellow citizens. Now, we're in a situation now where within the next 10 to 15 years in most Western countries, America, Britain, and Australia, that the majority of people are going to be non-white. And rather than see themselves as part of the wider society, they're all seeing themselves as special interest groups wanting special handouts and dispensations. Looking at the idea of if your grandparents are born say the Indians from the subcontinent, even Pakistanis, you're looking at great grandparents came to the West, and they're still the kids. They're still not integrated. They're still sending back to the villages of their ancestors for husbands and brides. Locally born children who might think about marrying a non-Indian, as in genetically non-Indian, come under huge pressure from their family. Even after 6-7 generations, come under huge pressure from their families. Threats of being disinherited and the whole thing. If they are thinking about marrying a non-Indian partner. So this is a diaspora that wants to remain genetically pure and consider it a fervent, an absolute mission, a core mission of their existence to stay genetically pure. So they're never, I would argue, they're never going to integrate. It could take 1,000 years for them to integrate. So why would you want people like that holding political office outside of India? What benefit will it bring to the society at large? I don't think it'll bring any. Now, I think they would more aggressively sell us out than say, a white politician might, who goes back several generations. But I don't know if the difference would be that great. I don't be that much. Both want to sell out the white population, and both would aggressively do so. So I'm not sure there's a difference there, and I don't think you can go back even 6 or 7 generations. I mean, you might have to go back, 15 generations, which seems insane to even contemplate it. So we're looking at going back, and unless your family was in England, for example, before the 1700s, born in England before the 1700s, you can't sit for political office. That would seem outrageous on the surface, but is it what has to be done to find or see a greater likelihood of patriots? And again, when I say patriots, I'm talking about people that represent the local fucking electorate. That's all I'm talking about here. And this disconnect, the elites have disconnected themselves from the local populations of the West, and that the elites represent the globalists and the globalist program, and the local population, the white population, be damned. They're more concerned with pandering to the new immigrants than they are with dealing with the white population, which again is a testament to the globalist program, that they're really white people as any political force have to be eradicated. They've been earmarked for eradication, and that's very much part of the globalist, the imposing of the globalist project on the West. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.